Wonderful. Okay, so I'm excited to share this research with you. This is a collaboration with Mark Himmelstein at Fordham University. So our goal here is to look for good forecasters and figure out what methods can we use to find them. So in general, we can think of two ways to obtain better forecasts from a crowd. One is to focus on the software of the system. So how we elicit the forecasts, what kind of aggregation algorithms we use in putting them all together into one wisdom of crowd estimate. The other is to focus on the forecasters, or what I call the wetware. So how do we find better individuals? And one starting point that that we found as part of my work in the Good Judgment Project is that there's a very straightforward relationship between skilled individuals and accurate crowds. So if you look at different features of the crowds, like complex emergent features that from the crowds versus simple, how skilled is the average individual, what we find in geopolitical forecasting is that the skill of individuals is by far the strongest predictor of the strength of the crowds. That seems different from some of the previous findings in the literature by Anita Woolley and Scott Page and others. But in our domain of geopolitical forecasting was a very strong starting point. And so we set out to look for different ways of identifying such skilled forecasters. One thing that we could do, and that's very straightforward, is just to look at past accuracy. So once you have dozens or hundreds of questions that have resolved, you can measure forecasters' accuracy, and it turns out that past accuracy is a very good predictor of future accuracy, and therefore, if you weight individuals based on their prior accuracy, that tends to improve the aggregates and tends to improve the overall performance. However, sometimes you don't have dozens or hundreds of questions that have already resolved and yielded answers that allows you to calculate accuracy. So we have to get creative and look for other measures. In a paper with Jens Witkowski and Lau Unger and Andreas Krauss, we developed a measure called proxy scoring rules, which basically is part of a class of intersubjective measures where you compare individuals' judgments to those of a crowd, and it turns out that the closer one is to a wisdom of crowd estimate at the time, the better that individual is, and you can do that without having the final ground truth resolution. We have also found in a different line of work that forecasters who update their beliefs in frequent small increments tend to be better even out of sample than those who make infrequent or large adjustments. And we are also finding some psychometric profiles of consistently accurate individuals. They tend to score well on IQ, numeracy, and knowledge measures. So we have a practical question, which is we want to spot skilled forecasters so that we can maximize the wisdom of crowds. And we have some theoretical questions, which is we want to see and measure how reliable is forecasting skill over time. How useful are self-report versus performance measures in our domain, and what are the underlying features, what are the underlying cognitive skills of consistently accurate forecasters. This is just at the beginning of that third question, but it is something that we're building towards. So our goal here was to summarize or organize all the measures in the literature, many of which are from the last 10 years. There's really been an explosion of studies and coming up with different ideas and different measures to spot accurate forecasters. We wanted to summarize the quantitative measures of association, mostly in terms of Pearson correlations between the criterion, which is usually accuracy, and the predictor measures. And we want to replicate it within a single data set, within a single uniform validation structure. So in our search, we identified 5 categories of measures that predict forecasting skill. So if this is a forecaster who is sitting down on the computer on an information system and providing, let's say, a probability estimate, we can think of several different classes of measure, and we categorize them based on the information that we use. So one is accuracy and related measures. For those, as I mentioned, we need ground truth resolution. So if someone says the Democrats are 42% likely to retain Senate, we need to know what actually happened at the end. So we need to wait, and that's often inconvenient. Then we have the intersubjective measures, of which proxy scoring rules are a type. Those involve a comparison between the individual estimate and those of the crowd. We also found a wide range of behavioral estimates. So those rely on basically behavior that forecasters exhibit on a platform, how often they log in, how much time they spend, how what kind of rationales or text-based arguments they leave on the platform. So those are all kinds of behaviors that we don't need either accuracy or we don't need a crowd consensus to estimate those. We also look at dispositional measures, such as what forecasters are thinking about themselves. How open-minded do you think you are? Are you a fox or a hedgehog? And as well as some performance measures like CRT, like the bat and the ball problem, or other IQ or numeracy type measures. And finally, there's expertise. And so here, there's an important point that I want to raise, which is, to us, expertise, and to the way it looks to many people, is expertise is related to, let's say, your education or how much you know on a topic, but expertise is different from skill. So just because you're an expert, just because you have a PhD and a very high H index on a topic, doesn't mean you're a good forecaster. So we want to empirically measure the association between expertise and actual performance. So our strategy in terms of the review part of the paper was, we were searching for grants for forecasting, prediction, accuracy, skill, and we're looking at both the manuscripts as well as grants that provided funding for this kind of research. We looked at all the papers and then cross-referenced, looking for all the papers that were cited by the ones we found, or that cited others, and to the extent that we found presentations or information that some researchers are working on new measures, we made requests for working papers. We found 16 manuscripts, over 3/4 of them in the last 10 years, with 47 different ideas or different measures that are potentially predictive of forecasting skill. And we extracted 89 correlations from the literature. Here's how they stack up in our 4 categories. And so in general, if you have accuracy measures, in general, those are the most reliable. If you have past accuracy, that's the most reliable or valid predictor of future performance. If you don't have accuracy, however, intersubjective measures that measure individual versus wisdom of crowds estimates tend to be the best. For behavioral measures, again, there's a wide range. And so for some of them that are more complicated, like belief updating over time or natural language processing features of rationales or text-based commentary tend to be highly correlated with accuracy. And basic activity measures, just as like how much time are you spending or how many questions you're answering, are less strongly correlated with accuracy. Dispositional measures, we found that performance-based measures like IQ or numeracy tend to be highly correlated, while self-ratings like do you think you're open-minded, or do you think you're a fox or a hedgehog, tend to have a much weaker and usually not statistically significant correlations with performance. Similar picture was in terms of expertise. So knowledge test performance, how much you can demonstrate that you know about a certain topic, like Asian politics, tend to be somewhat correlated with performance. But self ratings, such as how expert do you think are you on this topic, tend to have 0 or no correlation. So in study 2, what we wanted to do is replicate selected measures that we could find in our data in a new setting in the ACE forecasting tournament. The issue that we had was that there was a wide range of research designs, validation measures, and so we couldn't say that all the correlation or association measures were comparable to one another. So we wanted to try to replicate in one place at least the measures that we could find. So we used data from ACE and in particular the Good Judgment Project. That I was a postdoctoral scholar, so I knew that data, and that was a natural place to go. It was one of the largest data sets of crowd predictions, with over 4 seasons, 500 questions, over a dozen conditions, 1,000 forecasters working independently. This is important. So we're not looking at data of forecasters working in teams, only ones working independently, and over a million forecasts in total across conditions. And we were using a validation structures similar to the belief updating paper that I just mentioned. So basically, what we would do is we'll do a cross-sample validation where we would calculate a measure based on a set of questions, and then see how that measure predicts performance on a different set. Sorry. So, for example, for one person, the questions may randomly be selected in two hats this way, but for another forecasters, it may be a different selection. And so we were basically able to replicate a subset of these measures, and we find the same general order of, starting from accuracy as the most strong correlates of performance, and then going down over intersubjective behavior, dispositional, and expertise-based measures. Again, we were looking at proxy scores. It depends on whether you look at it at all versus first forecast. Belief updating measures do better than simple basic activity, and performance-based measures of disposition and expertise do better than self-ratings. So the final step was to look at, to come up with machine learning or a simple lasso model that basically condenses the predictors to a small set of the ones that are most useful. And so basically what a lasso model does is, out of, for example, dozens of indicators, it selects the few that that add the most to fit, and then many of the measures are just not included at all. And so the few measures that survived our selection process was proxy forecast, so how close is your first independent forecast to that of the crowd, belief updating magnitude, how large are your updates, smaller updates indicate better performance or predict better performance, more frequent forecast updates predict better performance, and more extreme forecasts in our case predicted better performance out of sample. And out of dispositional measures, we had several different measures of IQ or numeracy, and those tended to be the best. So in conclusion, we have what we can call the meta wisdom of crowds. So apart from accuracy, the best predictor of how well an individual would do on a set of questions in the future is how close their forecasts are to consensus. And the second general pattern that we found is that there's a lot of value in demonstrated performance measures. So instead of asking for self-report, we're better off seeking behavioral measures. So rather than asking someone, do you think you're an expert on the topic, or show me your CV, I want to see your education and H-index, etc., it's better to just measure how accurate are you on questions of a certain type, or how knowledgeable are you on items, general knowledge items, or subject matter knowledge items that you can ask in a given topic. Interestingly, and that's something that's very well known in the literature. So there are patterns about active open-mindedness and whether you're a fox or a hedgehog, and while those have been predictive in other research, such as Dr. Tetlock's research on political experts, in a large tournament setting, those measures tend to be basically not significantly correlated with future performance. So if you want to look at if you want to predict future performance, you're better off not asking the questions about how people think of themselves and their thinking styles, but rather measure behavior. So in this case, a measure of how often or how much they update their beliefs or forecasts is more predictive of future performance. So and based on that, we observe that being less dogmatic maybe is a good prescription for forecasters to follow in general, but it's not a reliably measurable marker of skill that separates better versus worse forecasters. And I think this this concludes. We have a version of this chapter that is available for downloading, and so if you're interested, you can take a look at the preprint. It will be a chapter that will appear in a book volume that is edited by Matthias Seifert, but in the meantime, it is available as a preprint. So feel free to take a look. And I'm open for any questions at the end or by email.